Aha! So, fair viewer, it is that was a bit cheesy. Right then, so it's another day. It's nowhere near as cold, and thankfully it's nowhere near as windy. So you might actually be able to hear what I'm saying in this one. Let's get on with it. And in this video I'm going to be doing my top albums from 2016 right up to 2018. So let's go. I've already said that. And once again, before I get into my top albums of each year, I'm just going to mention a couple of the other ones that didn't quite make the top. Isan released Arctis. Avenged Sevenfold with The Stage. Not really a huge fan of Avenged Sevenfold, but I did enjoy a lot of this album, particularly the epic title track itself and the video that came along with it. Opeth released Sorceress. Not one of my favourite Opeth albums, but there was some strong stuff on here. The actual title track itself was progged out to all hell. I particularly enjoyed, was it Will O' the Wisp? Really folky little ballad, which yeah, I actually particularly enjoyed. Killswitch Engage released Incarnate. Of course, they released Atonement this year. I have to say, of the two albums, I did actually prefer Incarnate. I thought that was a very, very strong album. Neurosis released Fires Within Fires. Of course, again, you don't enjoy a Neurosis album, but you experience one. Dillinger Escape Plan released their final album, Disassociation. Is that what it is? Is it Dissociation? Yeah, their last album. At least they went out on their own terms, did it their way. Final album worth mentioning, well, it's more of an EP, I suppose, is Tosca with Ode to the Author, Rabia Massad, YouTuber who, yeah, his band Tosca, very, very good gent style instrumental tracks with, yeah, gent prog, I guess would be the way to describe it. And they released an album last year as well, which is also very good. So if you haven't checked out Tosca, definitely check out them. Now I'm going to go into my top albums of that year, my top 5. First up, I'm going to put Devin Townsend with Transcendence, someone who would normally be near the top for me. Not my favourite album of his. This was one where he involved the rest of the band far more, which was great for them, I'm sure, but in all honesty, I like it when it's just Devin doing what Devin does. He's the genius we're all there for. There was definitely strong moments on it. Stormbending is one of his finest songs. The build up of that song is absolutely astonishing. Strong album, always love what Devin does, but not quite enough to make it to the top. Next up, I'd like to mention Ancients with Voices of the Void, another Canadian group with prog metal leanings. There was a lot to enjoy on this album, and they're definitely one of those bands that need more recognition and more talked about them. I intend to do a review of both of their albums next year at some point. Next one I'd like to mention, a bit more of a mainstream one this one, but Metallica, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. I really enjoyed a lot of this album. I think it could have been 9 songs instead of 12. It could have easily just been the one disc. There was no need to have 2. And I think 9 of the 12 songs were very, very strong indeed. And it sounded great. The production was great. It sounded really crispy. But I mean, you know, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, it's a decent enough song. Spit out the bone, the thrashiest they've been in many a year, and showing that they can still hammer it home. And then you got some of the ballads like Halo on Fire. Some very strong songs on this album, and it's great to know that Metallica are still capable of putting out great music all these years later. Without a doubt, one of the most important bands in my life. So yeah, Metallica, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. There's no way I could mention the albums of this year without mentioning David Bowie and Black Star, his final album. And there's a real beauty to it, melancholy of course, but I don't know, there's just something special about this album. It really gets me. You got stuff like Lazarus, which had a really really trippy video that came along with it. This album kind of encapsulates all sorts of eras of his career really, and it's not surprising. I mean, when he was writing this and recording it, he knew he was dying, he knew he was on the way out, and I think that's part of why I love this album so much. Such an amazing artist all throughout his life, one of those guys who just did things his way. A true artist, changed when he wanted to, a leader, not a follower, and he went out with such poise and dignity. You know what I mean? Not many artists get to do that, of course, but he knew the end was coming, and yeah, he just went out with real style and grace and did it on his own terms still, you know, and really left, you know, kind of wrapped everything up with a nice little bow with this album. So yeah, Black Star by David Bowie has to be up there in my top albums of this year, and David Bowie's such an amazing artist, incredible. But my top pick for this year, and probably not a surprise to many people, is Gojira with Magma. Starting out with the almost ambient trippiness of The Shooting Star, a real slow build for sure, before getting into the more explosiveness of Cavalera, The Cell and Stranded, which is, I just love that song. I just love that song. The verse sections in that, just such a groove. A truly beautiful album, that one. I enjoyed very much, and I always loved those words in Cavalera: when you change yourself, you change the world. I love that sentiment, absolutely fantastic. Great album, my top pick for 2016. Ryota Shadow Adut. You've done that, now let's move on. So, 2017, again, let's go through some of the albums that didn't quite make my top of the list. Pallbearer with Heartless. Paradise Lost with Medusa. Always a pleasure to hear Paradise Lost. Again, like Neurosis, is it a pleasure? Zeal and Ardor with Devil Is Fine. That was actually originally my top, I think it was my number 5 pick for the year that year. I did a review. On reflection, it didn't quite make it, and for an album actually some of you might be a little bit surprised at. A bit more mainstream, but maybe I just didn't have the balls to admit it back then. Cavalera Conspiracy with Psychosis. That was a great album from start to finish, true return to form, and Max Cavalera has been on a real run of great stuff lately. I mean, the last Soulfly album, that was a great album as well. Stephen Wilson, To the Bone, a bit more pop for him, but there was still a lot of strong music on that one. I think I'm going to do a full review of the Stephen Wilson discography at some point, because he's definitely one of those artists, along with people like Devin Townsend. You know, I'm always inquisitive whatever they do, and it's always nice to know they go in different directions and do their own thing. So I'll definitely be doing a full review of that album at some point, along with some of his others. Noel Gallagher, Who Built the Moon. I've always been a huge Oasis fan, and I've loved a lot of Noel's solo stuff. The actual title track itself is such an epic song. I love it. It's real sort of almost James Bond theme type of theme. And also I really enjoyed Liam Gallagher's As You Were. Both the Gallaghers at it, and when they're not at each other, just get along, guys, just get along. That was just a couple of albums I wanted to mention from the year. Let's get into my top 5. First one, this might surprise some people, was actually Foo Fighters, Concrete and Gold. I don't really listen to a lot of Foo Fighters albums. They're one of those bands where, like a lot of people, I actually really enjoy their singles and their videos especially, but I've always found it difficult to get into their albums. But for some reason this one really got me. I really enjoyed this album. Run, I thought, was a fantastic song. Got an almost Sepultura Roots-esque type of riff in there, and Sky is a Neighbourhood is just such an anthemic, joyful song to sing along to. I listened to this album a lot, I really did. And yeah, I'm not going to apologise for it, it's on my list. So there you go, Foo Fighters, Concrete and Gold, deal with it. Next up, Chelsea Wolfe with Hispun. This was not as strong an album as Abyss, which came out 2015, I think it was. But there's still a huge amount to enjoy in this. Again, a very heavy industrial themed album. Songs like 16 Psyche are up with some of her best. Not as strong as Abyss, but still a very, very strong album. Also done a review of this one. Code Orange with Forever. A delightfully heavy album, this one. Really solid, heavy, heavy album. You've got that outright heaviness of opener and title track Forever, and you've got the more radio-friendly, dare I say it, Bleeding in the Blur, which is just a great song. I'd kind of be interested to hear them going a bit more in that direction, actually, to be honest with you. I'd like to hear what they do. Very good album for the year. I think the next album that I'd like to give special mention to would be Mira with Merit. which I believe translates to nightmare, if I remember rightly. That was an incredible album, one that I wasn't expecting. Amelie Brun mixing Nordic traditional folk music with death metal, and not only did it have her demonic howls, which could match any man, I will say that, but she also had that angelic voice of hers mixed in with it. Again, not just the typical blast beats and tremolo picking of death metal, or black metal should I say, but mixed with that pretty acoustic folk that really just complements it so well, along with Devil Is Fine by Zeal and Ardor. It was nice to see, some heavy music having a bit of something, a little something thrown in there to vary it up a bit. I got windy pops. Now we get to my standout album of the year, and I'm going to cheat a bit on this one and actually choose two, and this will probably come as absolutely no surprise. I don't know why I did that, because that was actually one, not two. This will be of no surprise to anybody who has been watching this channel for any length of time, but for me it has to be Mastodon, and they released both Emperor of Sand and the Cold Dark Place EP this year, and I absolutely loved them both. Huge Mastodon fan. The holy triptych of Leviathan, Blood Mountain and Crack the Sky was surely the peak of their absolute greatness, but The Hunter I thought was a great album, a very underrated album. Once More Round the Sun is probably the only album of theirs I have struggled a bit more with, but still a strong album. But Emperor of Sand, wow, what a great album this is. A return to the concept album that they're renowned for, and this is the most prog they've been in a long time, and what a joy it was to listen to. The Emperor of Sand itself was a metaphor for cancer, as Bill Kelleher's mother was diagnosed, was it with a brain tumour? I'm not sure, but sadly she passed away quite quickly. Also at the same time, Troy's partner was diagnosed with breast cancer. Luckily she made a full recovery, but safe to say, cancer and death, losing loved ones, was very much in the band's mind when they were writing this album. And I mean, Sultan's Curse, straight out of the gate, some great riffs. Show Yourself, which I think that it threw me for a curveball when I first heard it, but I really actually enjoy that song. It's such a great catchy song, I really enjoy it. The video is awesome as well. Steam Breather is not only a great song on this album, but I actually put it in my top 10 list of Mastodon songs. I did a video of that. And also the 4-track Cold Dark Place EP, which was mostly written by Brent Hines, I believe. Bill Kelleher wrote a hell of a lot of the riffs and the songs for Emperor of Sand, and this was much more of Brent's writings, and it shows as well. It's a completely different style for the band, and no less good. I think a lot of the songs were actually written around a particularly nasty breakup that he had. So yeah, there's definitely a melancholic feel to this, but two completely different feels to these releases. So yeah, a long-winded way of saying that Mastodon would be my top pick of 2017, with Emperor of Sand and the Cold Dark Place EP. That brings me to 2018, and I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I'm not going to go into this too much, because I did do a pretty extensive line of videos of this last year, and my opinions on the albums haven't really changed. Last year was definitely the most active I have been on the channel, and I did a huge amount of reviews. I can't remember exactly what my top 10 was in the end, but there's definitely a couple of albums that I'll just quickly mention now that have definitely stood out. Ghost with Prequel, I would still put that as my album of the year. I just enjoyed that album a lot, I really did. It was my first introduction to the band, to be fair. They're one of those bands I'd kind of been meaning to get into for a while, but for whatever reason I just never bothered checking them out. And then for the purposes of review, I checked out Prequel, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a cracking album. Cracking! Then you also had Sleep with The Sciences, their first album in years. They dropped it surprisingly, and that was a great album. High on Fire, of course, with Electric Messiah. Behemoth with I Loved You at Your Darkest. That was a great album. I think that was maybe my number 2 pick of the year. I can't quite remember. I mean, the whole point of me saying this in the first place was to say go and check out that top 10, but my opinion hasn't really changed that much. I think I've rambled on quite a lot on some of the other stuff on here, so I think that's fair enough. So we'll call that 2016 to 2018. I'm going to go off now and I'm going to do my videos for 2019. So I've got a few albums to mention and I'm probably going to go into my top 15. So whether it's going to be 2 separate videos or not, I'm not quite sure. I'll see what sort of length they go. And so that's it, 2016 to 2018. A lot of great albums. Run out of steam, and I. See you later.